Okay. Um, what a lovely start to our conversation, which will be continued in terms of the themes and the concerns from a quite different context, which I think is going to be one of the great benefits of our conversation today, that we see many of the same thematics around the role of practice and the role that it takes in a kind of epistemological way in broadening our field of what should be and what should be given due attention in our scholarly work. Um, we'll be drawing from the very rich experience that's been familiar but also ever-changing, provided by Professor Tejaswini Niranjana, who, while at her tenure here at Lingnan as head of the Cultural Studies Department, also piloted quite a number of pioneering performance and research projects that will be culminating in an album, and has already taken place as many performances both here in Hong Kong, in where else? Mumbai, in India, and so on and so forth. So we'll hear more about it in just a bit. So could I please ask on stage now Professor Teju Niranjana? Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. It is such a pleasure to be here in the Black Box again. I think we haven't been here since 2019, October. So I think it's a very path-breaking moment as well that we are back here and are able to gather in some way to listen to each other. Thank you all for being here. Much, much appreciated. And thank you all who are on Zoom. Very happy that you're here with us as well. I brought up this website just to show you that there is this website. It is connected to, linked to the CCRD overall Cultures of Sound and Music website. But this is something I would like you to take a look at. All the concerts we've ever done in multiple venues, and it's like 3 venues in India, several venues in China, and definitely in Hong Kong as well, including some discussions that take place in the Black Box, which you will see re-represented in this project in a different way. So take a look, and with that, I'll start my presentation. I do understand there are many students with us here, and maybe many people who have not heard about this project before. So I'm just going to try and give you a little introduction and give you a flavor of what the project has been for the last 4 years. Let me get out of this. Yeah. So what the Saath-Saath Project does is to bring into conversation singers and instrumentalists from India, mainland China, and Hong Kong. Saath-Saath is together, together in Hindustani, which is one of the 22 official Indian languages. It's an intentional repetition of a word to show its importance. And it mimics how one might say it in Cantonese or Mandarin. I'm going to say it very badly here. Thank you, Holly. Tai Tai. Rest? No? Tai Tai. Okay. Saath-Saath. Together, together. So yes, what can happen, what does happen when Indian and Chinese musicians meet? When I say Indian and Chinese, I'm not referring to nation states. I'm referring here to performative idioms coming from certain geographical locations, embedded in specific social, cultural, political histories. So what happens when these musicians come together? Are they able to overcome the lack of shared languages? Can they communicate, as I've argued in some earlier work of mine, where I proposed the idea of a lingua musica, a musical language. So can these musicians communicate through a musical language, a lingua musica, comprising voice and melody? And if they do that, then what are they communicating? If they're not communicating with words, and if they're only communicating via the musical language, what happens? Do they simply perform their own music? So you have Chinese music, you have Indian music. Are they simply performing this side by side? Does that mean together, together? And I will say maybe not. Or can they actually create new music together? Which has been the impetus of this project, as you will see, both in my presentation and the presentation of my colleague Ip Kim Ho, who will follow immediately after me. So these musical crossings, as we might call them, between the larger Indian subcontinent and this part of the world, date back to the 6th century. for whatever little historical information that we have. So it's a good 1,400 years. But this is not to say that it happened then and it can happen now. I don't think there's any inevitable logic there. So that happened during the Tang Dynasty, when songs, instruments, and musicians from West Asia and South Asia thronged the port cities of China. That's when the prevailing musical scale in China, it's believed, was transformed into the heptatonic scale under the influence of Indian or South Asian music. Although today, with China's turn to the West, that is beyond its West, as you might call it, there may be no traces of that 7-note scale. But there are people here far more competent to speak about that, like Yu Siwa and Kim Ho. So I won't dwell on that particular aspect of the musical history anymore. I'll come right to the present. In 2016, I moved to Hong Kong. And in that year, my filmmaker friend, Surabhi Sharma, and I, who have collaborated on several films together, all about music, in that year, we sort of repurposed the videos from an exhibition that we'd held in Mumbai, which is in Western India. It's a major city like Hong Kong. And that exhibition was connected to my research on North Indian classical music. So we had an exhibition called Making Music, Making Space. And in that, we also shown a few videos that were then adopted by the Shanghai Art Biennale in 2016, where they're actually now part of the permanent collection of the Power Station of Art. But to coincide with the Biennale opening, I took 3 Hindustani or North Indian classical music, 3 Hindustani vocalists to present concerts and workshops in Shanghai. During the time, we were introduced to a troupe of Kunchu performers, Kunchu opera, and to a pipa player. And then we talked to them. They said, let's try and work together. It didn't really go very far. We did one set of performances where the pipa player also tried to come in, and that was it. And we thought that was the end of the story. However, I think from the following year, 2017, meeting colleagues like Kim Ho here, meeting and talking to Yusiwa, talking to other friends, we figured that we might be able to somehow press forward with this project of musical collaboration. So what are the questions? And Anjali mentioned that we're going to be talking about practice as research. Given that this is, like an audience to whom I'm first introducing my work, I won't stress that part of it too heavily in this presentation. But I did want to say that my work on North Indian music in Mumbai, which I had published as a book last year, had thrown up a number of questions, like research questions, which are about musical subjects, musical subjectivities, about the performance of modernity, about colonialism, about cultural practice, how cultural practice changes in the context of colonialism, and etc. and so on, right? So when I bring these questions to the context of Hong Kong, obviously I'd have to situate these questions quite differently. And again, I'm not going to go into that in any great depth. But I did want to emphasize that in this project, which supposedly is about Indian and Chinese music and can mistakenly be seen as being about India and China, it's not quite that. Hong Kong is not merely a gateway or a conduit. Hong Kong is very formative for the kind of questions that I'm asking about music. It's formative because it shares many historical features with Bombay or Mumbai, the city where I've based my previous project, and formative also in being the space or the site of my primary linguistic encounters on a daily basis with Chinese, Cantonese, also Mandarin. So in a sense, Hong Kong is formative for me in this project because it has helped me to configure the questions and struggles in which and through which the musical conversations have taken shape. So language and melody come together in very important ways in this project. So as we went along and tried to bring together 3 Indian vocalists, Kim Ho, who plays the yangqin, this wonderful instrument here, Chow Yu Fai, who is a cantopop writer and a poet, a major poet here in Hong Kong, and Zhang Yi, who's a pipa player based in Shanghai, and Zhelai, a folk singer based in Beijing. So all of these people were there in some ways speaking and not speaking to one another. So we are hampered by the lack of a communicative context for the cultural practices that are usually called Indian or Chinese. Instead, I think what happens when these musics come into conversation, there are multiple forms of Orientalist knowledge. Orientalism as a form of expertise about the Orient, including a lot of Orientalist common sense and prejudices. When I say I'm from India, people say curry. When someone in India, you say in India, Chinese food, they'll say, oh my God, they eat cockroaches, and so on and so forth, right? So the kind of really nonsensical prejudices that people always come up with form the context in which we communicate with one another. So what happens then with this kind of common sense is that the Asian neighbors become opaque to one another. They cannot really communicate. To cut through this opacity, I propose a mode of musical conversation as a cultural political intervention. It's not an exhaustive mode. It may not be able to address all these kind of awful Orientalisms, but it can build arcs of connection through melody and through gesture, through eating and drinking together, through being on the road together. The simple everyday gestures of eating and traveling, of making music together, that is making music Saath-Saath, constitute the intervention that aims to create subtle cultural shifts. And these are not state-centered. These cultural shifts, I hope, will prepare the conditions for other kinds of change. So I will now just mention quickly that I have a few questions that set me off on this particular journey. And after sharing that, I will just play you something from the film that we are about to release. So these were some of the questions. As modern people in Asia, how do we relate to our cultural pasts? What does it mean to acquire the skills to perform Indian classical music today, or to play the pipa, or the yangqin, or to act in Cantonese opera or in Kudju opera? What do modes of performance and musical teaching styles in India and China and in spaces outside of both of these tell us about our relationship to our everyday worlds? These are very big questions. And right now I'm seeing them only as providing a frame of exploration for this project. It's through the musical practice of Saath-Saath that we may eventually be able to understand how to address these questions. So let me play you a clip from the film that is yet to be named, which we are going to premiere hopefully in a few months. And this is set in the Black Box.
Perfect.
前來了，可認識我。
Yeah, perfect, perfect.
Da-da, 可認識我。
You can also do 我. It's easier to distinguish the word.
Okay, 可認識我。
Yeah. Perfect,
Oh.
perfect.
I won't remember.
I don't know if you can write anything to help you.
But
Yeah.
it's like so many chords.
Yeah.
前來了，前 again
Yeah,
前
前。
來了，想認識你。
Okay, 想 it's like the S, this one, 想 yes.
認識你，
你 and then a little 你
你。
yeah.
Oh, I'm back to all the shorthand.
Yeah,
Do
that is
Can you do
good.
it from top?
Yeah.
Oh, first it.
Lời.
Lời.
Because you're one that have the the notes like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have to be short for the first one, the higher one, because or else it doesn't sound like the word. So it's lời.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shall I repeat after you?
Lời mình liêu.
Lời mình liêu.
請認識語。
請認識語。
And then yeah.
請認識語。
And then
寫盤了。
請
Yang yang sing
Ngai, ngai. Yeah. Ngai. Yeah, it's like. Okay.
Yang sing ngai. Go there.
Take.
Go there.
Take.
Take.
Yeah.
Yeah, go there. Go
Yeah.
there.
Mm.
But how do you sing? Go there. Go there.
It's like that. Yeah.
Go there. Go there. Oh, you have to stretch that.
Guo, you mean?
Go there.
Mm.
Tang some more go.
Yeah.
Some more go.
Yeah.
Okay. Go there. Go there. Go there.
Mm.
Tang tang some more go.
Guo.
Go.
Go.
Go
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Go. Okay. Go.
Because the guo is like a more long word.
So it's a long word.
Yeah,
Okay.
so guo tek, guo tek. It's more
Okay.
like this.
Go take. Go take.
Go. Remember the chi. Go.
Yeah. Go.
Yeah.
Go
Guo.
take.
Yeah.
Go take.
Mm.
Tang some more go.
Mm.
The background to this is that this is the poem that was composed. The Bindu, who is a singer here, sent a melody to in the Indian raga Kamod to Chow Yufai. He listened to the melody on his headphones and treating the notes as composing prompts, Chow Yufai translated the tune into Cantonese words and phrases, whose tones of enunciation matched the Hindustani notes. So what emerged was this poem. I won't have time to go through it, but it's very rich in metaphors. And those who can read the Cantonese will also understand what it's doing. So I will quickly now, since I don't have much time, play you 2 tracks, audio tracks, and then save the rest of the comments for the discussion. Thank you.
雷鳴了，請認識雨。射盤了，請認識蟻。過的，過的，等什麼過？片刻，半生。找什麼美？狼來了，可認識錯。誰來了，想認識對。忘形了，請認識笑。無言了，請認識喊。而我自由了，不過，而你皺眉了，很美。前來了，可認識我。前來了，想認識你。
來明了，將認識要寫半了，將認識我。來明了，將認識笑寫半了，將認識愛過得當什麼過？別看無常，找什麼美？狼來了， sẽ lội sẽ nhìn xích tiền một nghìn lưu trái nhìn xích siêu một nghìn lưu trái nhìn xích học nhìn ngõ gì à will ba to in giao mẹ lưu ha mẹ chỉ lời lưu hỏi nhìn xích ngõ chỉ lời lưu sẽ nhìn xích nè.为什么你的心如此游荡？告诉我你在追寻什么？这是什么愿望？回到内心宁静。为什么你的心如此游荡？告诉我你在追寻什么？是什么愿望？回到内心宁静。मनवा तोरा भटकत काहे अब बताओ का तो ढूंढे आस लागत तरपत काहे राखो रे सबर मनवा प्यारे मनवा तोरा भटकत काहे अब बताओ का तो ढूंढे आस लागत तरपत काहे राखो रे सबर मनवा प्यारे मनवा तोरा भटकत काहे भटकत काहे भटकत काहे
什么你的心如此游荡？告诉我你在追寻什么？这是什么愿望？回到内心里。
Thank you all for listening. You heard Zhangi on the pipa. You heard Zhelai, Bindu Malini, Omkar, and Rutuja on vocals. The tune was composed by Zhangi, the pipa player, in Hindustani mode, and was performed in Hindustani. The words were composed by the team and then translated into Chinese. So I think you're now in for a treat. Kim Ho is going to talk about his own ethnographic cum musical experiences in India.